Here we go. It's the one fancy slide that I have that it fades in. It was from a template, so you can bear with me on this one. So hi, it's me. I got the great intro. I appreciate that. So so one thing I would like to say, thank you for inviting me here. It's not my first time in Indianapolis, first time here at CircleCityCon, so I really appreciate you guys having faith in me that I'm going to present something that's kind of interesting. So having been around a bit, which means I'm kind of old and wizened, and it also means I've seen a lot of stuff and have experienced a lot of things. So this talk is to kind of cover some of that in perspective on how and where to meet your peers, your management, and other organizations and community about what you do, what you can do, and what you should be doing in this career space. Think of this as a guide on how to bridge gaps between different roles, functions, and opportunities in this space, and what you can do to make your life a little bit better, your job a little easier, and maybe have a little bit of fun while you're at it. So, a little history. So where we are, as a simple calendar recounting of it, about 40 years into what's now commonly referred to as cybersecurity. This isn't saying that like hacking, phreaking, building and defending secure systems didn't exist before that time, but as a space that can be clearly defined as such, this is where we are. So as we wake up each morning, some of us jokingly refer to ourselves as graybeards. Our joints crack, grabbing the occasional NSAID, wonder why the heck we're still punching the clock each day, and we look back and think about where we came from and where we are now. Sometimes we're way better off in those early days, and sometimes things are much, much worse. So, first off, this isn't a career talk, this isn't a pipeline talk, nor is this a diversity talk. This is just a real talk. This is a talk on where we can conceivably go next, given our 4 decades of slogging along, coming from folks ripping apart hardware in their bedrooms, basements, and garages, and to where people can claim a PhD in an area of expertise that we may have all just had fun for laughs way back when. So current events, if you guys have been watching the news and obviously like catching Mudge and all sorts of other stuff online, I really appreciate seeing everybody in Mudge We Trust t-shirts. So as it stands, I'm in a few minutes to kick off of a conference that's now can almost add a tens digit to how long it's been going on. So DEFCON, about 1/3 of what we affectionately refer to as Hacker Summer Camp, turned 30 this year. You guys made that joke earlier about someone being old. But we still encounter new things every day, but much of it is based on mistakes or issues introduced into languages, hardware, and operating systems years ago that adversaries are still discovering and working against us on. It provides some of us a really good paycheck, and for a couple new folks here, it's a suitable answer to your family members when you get asked around the dinner table, what do you want to be when you grow up? Personally, I started out as most of the people my age, wanting to be a vet, an astronaut, or like in my case, I wanted to get into visual effects for film. But well before I fell into my current career space and glommed onto it the same way a remora would glom onto a shark for cast-offs. I'm not one of the rock stars, ninjas, pirates, or have a blue check mark on the Bird platform or make a living on the speaking circuit. I'm just here. I'm a working stiff, just like many of you here. I have some news for you from 2 out of those 40 years to impart for the next 4 or even just 2 decades coming up. So I currently work for 2 organizations. One is my primary source of income, t-shirt here. One is a large entertainment company that's reflected in my clothing, and I'm kind of prohibited on speaking on behalf of, but the other one is a side gig that I do for a DC research think tank on security policy, and that's actually where my interests lie, so it's kind of cool. My full-time job says, because of the business that they're in, I can't ask for a 3, 5, or 10-year plan because the technology changes so often. Now, the side gig, that 2%, asked me to think about what's like hot now and develop strategies that can put those 3, 5, and 10-year plans into something that can be managed and trusted. This makes my head hurt every day having to context switch several times. I look back to when I was a little bit more operational. Oh yeah, go ahead. Shoot away. I look back to when I was a little bit more operational, finding evil in a tech environment, but where things are kind of coming across, your threat feeds and in social media today, and realize it's just a little bit more sophisticated than what it was back in the 2000s, early 2000s, and we're still seeing the same threat actors doing the same stuff. We have new tools, as so do they, and not so much of it this is a Cold War, kind of an armistice, but it's more of an escalation of the brinkmanship. I look hard into the abyss of the future and know that anything that I say today, probably by the time I step off this stage to some extent, will be invalidated. And that's what we deal with collectively on a day-to-day. So first off, one of, I think, the problems I'll get rail on, I'm sorry about the small text here, is over-professionalization. I know that's a huge, big-ass word, but let's get in the crux of this. So many of you who call this space a career have a title that, based on research that from other talks I've done over the years, didn't actually exist before 2010, honestly. You've got, whatever inflated title that may be here, and they put it there so they can give you a paycheck and say you're doing something. For those who aren't my age, this is either also backed by like a certificate, a certification, a degree, or some other track you followed, adjunct to any like personal interest you've had in this space before you actually drew a paycheck on it. That's cool, that's okay, that's how I got into this. However, it is a current barrier to entry to this job market for many opportunities. They say, please have this cert, this degree, be this tall to get on the ride, have a decade experience in a tech language that's barely half a decade old. Shit's broken, I say, but we keep feeding it. Differences between expectations and reality, and also the desire driven by regulations, laws, and the general sense from private companies, the public sector has a little bit different issues of please don't sue us, and then ask the world for help and just get about 30% of what they actually wanted in the way of resources and talent. Me, I sure as hell didn't think this was going to be my space. While I have a degree, it's no way related to my current job, or nor any of the titles I've had when I've been remotely associated with security. So, my terms are, don't put faith in paper. Put faith in yourself. However, for those who are hiring, stop asking for frickin' unicorns. They don't exist in quantity or cost that you can afford. So rejigger your asks and think deeply better about your actual needs. Even the US government doesn't have it right. In my two lovely database talks on hiring in this space, both of them were at ShmooCon and DevSecOps, the data which drives this demand is so out of sync. Labor Department is so out of sync that in reality, that feeds an entire news cycle. You've seen the articles this summer about the walls are coming down, we don't have enough cyber bodies and stuff like that, when it actually isn't. Really, hire smart people, hire curious people, hire creative people. Most of those have talents you can teach the rest to. There's no ISC or EC Council cert that's going to foretell when you get popped by a nation state, which is the in vogue adversary now, or how those staff actually perform under pressure given that particular situation. I've been there, I've done that. It's all down to how people work with one another and see if you can look at the situation and realize how screwed you actually are and then work towards fixing it. So next one, gatekeeping. This is not a career talk. So I mentioned graybeards earlier, and that's a little bit more affectionate term for folks who've been around, seen some stuff, and I've seen some stuff, and tend to better regale us in stories of in your face that we're at a different level now. And they're just being technically proficient at fixing stuff, it just won't make the grade nowadays. We actually have to properly interact with other humans to be a little bit more effective at our chosen vocation. We, as humans, have a self-protection switch. Namely, if we feel threatened, we find ways, barring traditional weapons, to fend off impending doom. So, as I noted, for those who've been around, we may be in self-protection mode, or about keeping control, knowledge, experience, and just general act like a-holes when it comes to welcoming and supporting new people in the field. Seriously, stop that too. I can count in large volumes of how much I'd appreciate another person to help with all the work I've done and have to do. Your fear about transferring knowledge and trust to somebody else is misplaced. Next off, the popular one here, management versus engineering. Most organizations, as it seems, maybe your own is a little bit different. They often identify as person X as being fantastic at what they do. And they think about how to transfer that and manage that knowledge, so they promote them. Yeah, in most cases, that doesn't actually work. Management of people, projects, and so forth is another skill entirely different from doing the tech thing that you're most likely known for. Being forced to basically lead people or lead projects and programs may push folks well beyond their personal comfort levels and even career desires. Much like in academics, because you're a talented researcher doesn't make you an actually excellent teacher. If you have the talent for people and resources and management and communication skills, and by far that is rare, but it's also desired. So it's up to you to determine how you want to use that. For managers, listen to your people, listen to what they have to say. If you take the route of placing your staff in roles or duties that they have no desire to be in, then you may be the only person at fault if they decide to leave. But if they stay, it may actually adversely affect your operations and the goals of your organization. However, this is me coming from a former hiring manager, Provide opportunities and growth avenues for people to explore. Strictly being dogmatic about keeping technical people technical and management people management removes the ability to build trust, empathy, and build communications and work experiences for your staff. So, everything does change. There is, at no time in your career, where you or your peers have mastered all that there is to be in this career space. Stop comparing yourself to others. I've had people tell me that on Facebook when I complain. If they're super deep in a topic or they're super broad, you just do you. One constant here is that everything changes and evolves, and so can you, but don't let it get overwhelming. Finding your niche or a sense of enjoyment is part of the career and life development. It may be immediate or it may take some time. Heck, I'm 25 plus years into this and I'm still dancing around with what gets me out of bed in the morning beside an alarm. The other thing about change is you're a little lost now, but until something comes along that hits you where it's the right thing you want to be doing, it could be something that doesn't exist now, or it could be something that you're smashing two things together and eventually you come and make this vision of awesome that you want to go and do for the rest of your life. Heck, I'd been doing cyber threat analysis well before they had that fancy title. It was interesting and fun, but it was long ago. This was for the DoD, and that's, they had their own terms for it. I forget what it was. But I don't think I'd actually want to return. However, having that informs me, like tools in a toolbox, that this capability is having somebody now specialize in it, and it's just part of their day job, and it's an activity all into their own. So you don't have to be the master of everything. You still need to fill your toolbox, but it's okay to loan those tools out. Even get rid of some tools if you're not using them on a regular basis, and just suits that it just doesn't suit what you want to need or do. If you learned it before, you can learn it again. It's just not going stale, it's just the focus and relevance. So, this part I really want to kind of drive home a bit. It's your sphere of influence. I'm going to go off a little script here for a moment, because this is more relevant to this week's activities. A lot of times when you are in an organization where you feel alone, or you may have another friend or a peer that you're dealing with, and you're wondering why you're not gaining traction. And sometimes that's frustrating, it leaves you upset and tired and not wanting to do your work. The key thing is to understand where your sphere of influences are, where you go and touch those people that can actually kind of help you along and get you out of that hole. So I often get asked, what can I do with X to get Y? And it all comes down to knowing where that sphere of influence actually covers, and where you need to work to get it to have others get it connected where you want it to go and where you want it to be. It can shrink sometimes, it can span other times. Often, that sphere of influence shrinks when you change roles or employers. So if you leave, this massive sphere of influence you may have had at a current employer shrinks down, you got to start all over again. Again, that's okay. It's just the natural form of moving around. Figure out what you can change, both in the near term and strategically in the far term. This is chess, this isn't a speed run. I'm unfortunately not tying it to the cartoons, but I'm more of a video games person, so we'll see where that goes. Those require some nuance and manipulation. This is a little bit of that social engineering aspect. Social engineer your boss a little bit. Don't do anything like gaslighting or anything malicious, but understanding that each person in the role needs to be handled very uniquely. A lot of frustration arises when you start on something like a new gig, a project, or another activity, and feel that nobody is listening, paying attention, or seeing the value in your work. The sphere is part of where those edges can kind of touch and influence. So sometimes aiming too wide in your blast radius and thinking you have this megaton idea when it's actually just like a few kilotons, and those you wish were actually paying attention are totally looking elsewhere. So it's like a lot of little explosions. However, a number of small kiloton blasts, can get you the attention you so rightly need. So if you have a whole row of these little small kiloton blasts, it'll add up to clearing out what a megaton would. Your sphere of influence can increase as you move up the proverbial ranks, but again, if you don't feel like you want to climb that ladder, there's no reason to go do so, but it isn't always actually guaranteed. As you can have an enormous amount of influence, but also be isolated, because having to pull all those switches for management and managing people and projects becomes distant from the main action, so you're not down and getting that visceral feel. So carefully figure out where you feel comfortable and where your skills and influence find that balance to where you're comfortable with it. There's also a way to kind of chain those spheres of influences, like a perverse Venn diagram, where your work and messages are kind of carried up the chain across the org and network structure. So if you can find that, that's also the next kind of step there. So Next up is getting this gang or band back together. Like, why security conferences? You all are sitting out here in the middle of Indiana. I'm from DC, so 500 miles to get here and trying to figure out how Indiana works. You find yourself here at this conference. Some of you attendees, some staff, some speakers, so thank you all who are here. And to be honest, in our field, it's one of the best ways to expand our sphere of influence. You're here, you're meeting people and so forth. You're acting locally in this case, and hopefully spreading the knowledge globally, and especially since our career space is rapidly adapted to sharing talks via YouTube and other means, that's another way where it kind of carries beyond that. This often comes because we need to disseminate our timely research quickly to the world and others, but also the need to just be open and transparent about the cool stuff we found, or build, or we know. Well, evidently, we see the social aspect of get-togethers like this where, Hacker Summer Camp, you go out there, you get to see friends, it's family. But also smaller ones like this, it's your local community. You're getting people, you're building that network, you're building those spheres of influences. It's that way for folks from different organizations and situations to get together, come and learn, exchange experience, complain at times, but also check on their work to see how they're doing, if they're doing the right thing, or what they could be doing to make their lives a little bit better and a little bit easier. It's often harder to show value to management, especially if your attendance is sponsored. Like, why are you going to the security conference? Why are you spending your weekend doing this? Well, sometimes it's fun, but other times you're here to learn. So one of the things is trying to demonstrate that value back to management. It's difficult, especially if they don't show up. I've always been dismayed for the longest time as not seeing senior leaders in our career space actually never make it to smaller cons like this. Even the larger ones are really sparsely attended. Over time, seeing ShmooCon, DEFCON, you occasionally see some people in suits show up. However, in my current role, it has me addressing more kind of larger technical partners outside of just security. And typically they're vendor conferences, AWS, Google, Microsoft, and so forth. And they push towards having these guided executive experiences, these VIP experiences. And they shelter them away. They kind of move them off into an enclave or behind a door, and they give them the better food and the better drinks and the better swag. And generally those just focus on general tech. It kind of seems very top level, and they just get a surface experience to this. And then it just leaves us trying to gather all the details. We're in the technical sessions, trying to write everything down, come back with notes, and trying to bring that to them. Well, that kind of seems insurmountable. It's an opportunity to kind of bridge those gaps between you and management. It's a conversation starter. Did you go to this session, or did they tell you about this thing? So there's a little bit of this kind of gossamer threads that you have, especially if you do have management yourself attend the same conference. But the key thing is to try to keep that momentum up and going, trying to make sure that when you get back, you have that conversation immediately with them. So you don't need to be a security person to help in this area. Now, what I was going to note under this last point, while doing my own time to try to do some outreach and whatnot, that wasn't at a security conference, it was a little tough. It almost cost me my job, and I wish I could find the pictures and stuff I did to kind of do the research for this. But I actually made that effort to bust the executive out of that little bubble that they were in. Yeah, it did work. It required some time with Photoshop and a trip to Kinko's the next day and some scissors and glue and stuff like that. But I, went and, kind of followed the rules a little bit, kind of broke the rules and busted them out of the executive session. And what it was is just, you needed to give them that visual feel, like this was a Gartner conference. This is the reason I don't get to go to Gartner anymore. I forged a badge, just be out. So I forged a badge to be able to get and talk to the executives and told them, I said, you really need to go to these other sessions. Don't just sit in there and have the nice little, little cucumber sandwiches and whatnot. You need to come here and get the really crappy brownies that they're serving. But this isn't really talking about breaking about the rules. It's just getting more serious about your work, getting what makes you excited about your day-to-day job and getting that instilled in the executives. This also is an opportunity to kind of get outreach outside your own tech circles, perhaps somewhere elsewhere in your business line, budget and finance, HR, some other place where you can kind of show tangible benefits without actually trying to slog through the orthodoxy or the org chart. In this case, you're actually hacking the organization. You're trying to demonstrate your value outside your typical organization structure. If you're in like IT or in security, you're usually pretty well siloed, and this is an opportunity for you to kind of like step out over here like, oh, hey, HR, or oh, hey, here, manufacturing, or something like that where you may be having your organization. Some folks, I will tell you, will get pissy if you go outside that chain of command. But you need to find those areas and opportunities where others can help you carry some of that water and spread the good words on your behalf about your work. Essentially, it's creating your own marketing. So this is the one I will rail on. Paper schmaper, can you do a thing? So screw certifications. Yeah, man, screw them. Like, really, screw them. I hate them. I don't have any, which is why I hate them so much. I do have a degree, but it's absolutely useless in my current role. But I think maybe early on it helped, and in those times it was really, I wasn't doing anything actually related to my degree either. But it was a foot in the door. But it also comes from both sides. Organizations are putting too much emphasis on outsourcing trust. Like, hey, you've got an EC Council certificate. Oh, you're a hacker. Well, no, you took a test, you did the labs and stuff like that. Like, I want to put you in and have you do the thing and help solve a problem, something a little bit more tangible, more applied. And it helps ignore that experience that knowledge exists. Like before we had this whole run on certs, I'd ask people about like, hey, what do you do at home lab? What do you do in the free time? Do you war drive? Do you do hardware hacking? Any of these things that shows a level of curiosity. Even as a hiring manager, I've been struck by some of these stupid interviewing rules for me and my panel that prevent me from actually asking about that skill. And that's where hires have horribly gone sideways. We hired a CISO, whatever you want to pronounce it as, who came from DHS when I was at HHS. And I wanted to drill him, like, do you understand how to set up like an IDS? Like even an older individual, and it's like, did you have this visceral feel of like getting frustrated with rules or HIPs when it blocked everything? And I couldn't ask any of those questions. It was like all these little softball management questions. I'm like, oh, man, I want to know if you've had this pain that I've had. So unfortunately, there's no way to do this without having them take, surprise, a certification exam. So you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. But what this does is it kind of does nothing but actually standardize answers and removes all that creativity. I'm sure a lot of you have run into stuff where you've had to kind of throw the book out and come up with something new. That's the kind of stuff that I think that really needs to be fostered here in our community, at these conferences, and at your jobs. Is like, you could pull someone from somewhere outside of security and give them this problem, and they'll look at it a little bit differently. So it does actually kind of play against the demands of organizations wanting these unicorns, because you're not looking inside. And a lot of these times we get these postings like, as I mentioned before, I want 10 years experience in a language that's been around for 5 years. And we love to roast those things on social media, but we also have to do our jobs about telling managers and other folks basically, just stop doing this. It's absolutely useless. Like, honestly, risk your neck, because you're going to eventually have to work with that person. So this is where some of that fixing kind of comes into play, and possibly if you have some extra spoons to basically go and do it and are involved in that role or can influence that role in process and hiring and help change some of that process. I believe actually one of the folks here, she is not in the room right now, but she was sitting right over here, wrote a book on this topic. I highly recommend it. Alyssa, read it, awesome, more in depth. Give her some props on that one. So we'll often hear organizations that use this as a bare minimum. You got to be, just another level of gatekeeping. Partake in non-traditional learning, you're screwed. If you're non-neurotypical, you're screwed. Whole other folks who just go through here and card collect all these things that they need for these job requirements, but not get a full understanding of it. And it's just a real shame. When I do resume review, I usually recommend on people to focus on talking about concepts that they understand and where they can improve on things, rather than just loads of certs and stuff that they've installed. Express where your interests lie, especially if you're new. If you're someone fresh out of college or out of a degree program, I've had so many people kind of come up to me and say, where do I start? Information security and cybersecurity is just such a huge, huge, huge thing. And I was like, well, do you like chasing down bad guys? Okay, cool. Blue team forensics incident response. Do you like just the minutia of just basically grinding away at something? Okay, cool. Malware analysis and exploits and stuff like that. There's always something. If you have those types of focuses, much like trying to get someone interested in what wine they like, or if they like a certain type of cheese or something like that. Those are the kind of questions you kind of need to ask to help focus people there. There's always another side to this, and it's the hiring side, and that's a whole other talk, but that's another side that totally needs changing and help with. So if there's a follow-on talk to this, I would love to have someone come up and say, hey, yeah, I've cracked the egg. I know how to get HR to do the perfect hiring. We have the most amazing team. We're killing it. we're going to move on to another organization because they're entirely secure. So, let's move over here. No. Oh, no. My remote got depaired. Oh, it wants to do a software update. Defer. Hells yeah, I'm going to defer. I'm in the middle of a talk. There we go. Thank you, EA. So hacking people, it's not what you think, but it kind of sort of is. So for me, I've been termed sometimes as a disgruntled employee, not an insider threat, but someone who's been upset at the organization. So let's be honest, we've all been at this stuff for a while. You've been at a role or organization or another situation that's been deemed a little bit less than ideal or good or even healthy. You know, people's hair are falling out, you're sweating, you got zits and all sorts of stuff. It's a paycheck to keep you from going home and just playing video games all day. Let's just freely admit that, okay? So the key thing to keep you moving forward and hopefully up and out of that situation is being a useful disgruntled employee. So why would I kind of say that? Because it kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive. But let's take a moment and examine how you got where you are when you're at that point. You know, where did things go wrong? Can you do some self-examination as to, is this an organization thing? Is it just not a fit for me? Do I hate my coworkers? Is the coffee bad? But you know, sometimes you can adjust a few things and it'll actually make you want to stick around. You know, maybe opening up the blinds in your office if you have a window, or you know, walk around after every 10 minutes when you get frustrated with an email from your boss. That's some growth. Other times you may actually just need to document like what's off, and if you know you can't hang around to be there and help, find somebody who can carry that message forward. And while you're there and have moved on, that person gets to kind of carry that water, but eventually they'll have a stack of paper this high telling you what you need to fix. If you don't, it's just going to get worse for everybody else there. I've seen it. I've actually had one experience where I told that they needed to fire this person, and 3 weeks later they were finally fired, and everybody at the organization was like, huzzah! And I'm like, yes! It took a while, but it happened. So again, in short, it may really be them and not you, and they may be open for change or suggestion. That was the case where that worked, especially if they're moving forward without actually spending some time re-examining things and what they do. Self-reflection for an organization is costly. It doesn't happen all the time, but if there's enough kind of small kiloton explosions, you can actually get that to happen. There's also another way of doing this, and that's by burning everything down. I don't recommend that. 30 years of experience, not a good idea. But, I mean, if anyone has a real recent example of how to do both, it's Mudge. You know, we're letting this simmer and work through that process, but, you know, as somebody who's worked for an inspector general of the federal government, we have whistleblower facilities for this. But for publicly traded companies like Twitter, there's the SEC and Congress, and for others, some of your organizations may have an ombudsman that will document issues and stuff like that. Collect those things, move that forward. As long as it's there, that's a chance that those issues are documented and you're kind of out of the hot water at that point. But don't give up hope entirely. I'm gonna do a time check here real quick, just make sure I'm not running long. So again, play with your management and always win. Management isn't as smart as you want to give them credit for. I went from a low-end systems engineer all the way up to a C-level in the government. Dumbest people I ever knew were in the top levels of government because they've just progressed to that point where they're just pushing paper and people around. And you're the smart person, but don't let it get to your head. A good leader will staff the organization with people smarter than them. And I love staffing people who are way smarter than me because I got to learn and listen to them, and they told me all the really cool shit. And I love that, and I trusted them, I trusted their knowledge, I trusted their skills. But also knowing that, but also understand, check your ego at the door. It'll help with the day-to-day work, allow you to understand your impact without actually playing those types of politics. Granted, you'll actually have to play to their blind side a couple times, where you may push a little bit softly and know where you kind of need to push them over the edge. Recommending do not actually push them over the edge down the stairs. That's not the way to progress up the ladder. But some of this is actually also loaded with some gender and age and other kind of biases, women, minorities, and so forth. Some of these have different qualifying things on there, so I'm going to gloss over that, but just make sure you're aware that, you know, there's a modifier to every one of those kind of comments on that one. But in those cases, it's also useful to kind of team up with other folks to basically work on getting some momentum to get yourself heard. In some of those cases, you know, you can find a peer, find someone in another department, I wouldn't recommend actually looking to, if you're a mid-level manager, don't look to your staff to carry your own water. That's kind of bad juju. But definitely look for other folks who are running into similar issues, brainstorm and move on from there. But other times, and again, when I mentioned about kind of the gender and racial and other backgrounds, we have women in the audience will definitely know. The parroting. You'll raise your hand and say something in a meeting, and you'll be like, hey, this is a really good idea. And then Bob, 2 chairs down, will say the exact same thing. And they'll go, great idea, Bob. Got to be careful about that one. But if you can find some people, other women in the group, they've documented this at the White House, that they'll echo that message, that parroting of that message to emphasize that, yes, we're all saying the same thing together. We're coming from this perspective. That's one other mechanism to basically start carrying that message forward. But it's not there to raise them up, your peer or whatever, even potentially a male colleague, and not kneecap yourself. Know what credit is worth fighting for. Don't get petty. Don't get greedy. Find the highest value thing you want credit for and focus and fight for that one. Again, as you see me gesticulating up here, communication is just more than waving your hands. I know I've been beaten this to death in other venues. I've been back to my alumni mentoring events and so forth at my alma mater. And I usually tell, if there's any non-major specific training or practice I would actually give anybody, I would say take a debate or speech class and a writing class. I've never I underestimated how much writing and communication I've had to do since I've become kind of a professional with the small p but quotey fingers. Much like people kind of joke about schools not teaching life skills like filing taxes, letting young adults know that no matter what career they end up in, communication skills are key. Those are the things I'd say if you could carry that back to your younger self. High schools, if you go and volunteer there, or events here, just let them know. And this goes from engineer all the way up to a journalist or a programmer. If you don't get your ideas across well, all the items I mentioned you should be doing about gaining support, growing, and evolving in the space are just all for naught. Know when to gesticulate, though, although I recommend not using the bird too often in meetings, but you do have a right to get animated. So, it's like, yes, yay, not, fuck you too. Properly extolling your excitement, urgency, or other attention to a point, like, I gotta go to the bathroom type kind of thing, may get that into people, but if you're grabbing their attention, you gotta do it at the right moment. Don't interrupt them, don't tell them years later, like, hey, that meeting back in 1994? Yeah, that idea, yeah, move that forward. You gotta find that right moment to strike. This can also work for meetings and presentations, although this career space, as we know with all these titles and stuff, are very well known for catchy titles and memes and other witticisms, which I've extricated from my entire presentation. As I said earlier, what gets you out of bed each morning may differ vastly from person to person, or even your boss. Knowing what folks that have those different priorities is key to navigating the daily interaction with your personal and professional lives. It's probably the essence of actually social engineering. Figure out what the end goal is, and as obnoxious as sports analogies are, work out a game plan on how to be avoiding being blocked and tackled. When I was a CTO, I worked with business representatives more than fighting with specific techies about a point. I didn't want to get into a technical argument. I wanted to go to the business person and be like, hey, what do you want? What do you need? What are you starting with? What are you finishing with? I knew my CIO boss was not as technical as I was, which I'm not very technical, so that means he was really not technical. But I used similar business language to ensure he was on board in line with all the business units. So it's a lot of this kind of observe and react type kind of interactions. New slide. Yes, it worked. No updates. Yes. It's very easy for technically minded people basically think you can engineer your way out of everything, whether it's technology, use of math, or proper use of detonation material. Sadly, as noted before, communication skills are all the easiest and most precise to use, but are also more fungible. So it's finding the right tools to kind of wield in this place. We're often not forging ahead. We are often forging ahead, negative there, introducing new tools, solutions, gizmos to already muddled process and problem, and often not taking that moment to kind of step back, talk about it, eliminate some things, change, or otherwise reconfigure the entire problem to get to that goal. We just want to kind of slog ahead, bang our head against the wall. But that's also assuming everybody can kind of use the same tools. Again, for some folks, language and other communication tools may be difficult. So assessing where you can meet in the middle or assist with bridging gaps will be absolutely paramount. Some of the most amazing and rewarding work that can be done is gap bridging, as it generates an outcome of learning and adapting. For me, my current job, I do a lot of bringing people together. I don't get to do hands-on keyboard as much anymore. So beating your proverbial head against the wall just because it's the only thing you want or can do is going to be absolutely counterproductive. Sometimes it may just kind of be pivoting to the side and then going at it and trying to figure out the controls of the console. That's the thing, is it's always, you don't just want to kind of flog ahead, you kind of may have to look at things at a different angle. There's plenty of these movies where, you know, you look at something, you move to the side, and oh my gosh, there's a path through. That's the kind of the route you need to be taking for a lot of things. So again, not everything can be solved, or the popular term in the last 15 years has been disrupted, or wants to be solved by applications of technology. Sometimes if that tech fails or it's too ubiquitous, Uber, folks forget that the alternatives have the ability to fall back on original methods, rendering everything unusable and untenable. So supplanting a process with automation or a fancy UI may miss actual crucial and more organic ways that methods or processes that we're moving along to could be more resilient and optimized, just because it has to be teched up. I just remember being able to stand and like wave down a taxi. Now I gotta fire up an app and just like worry about my credit card and worried about, you know, is the person who's gonna pick me up in the car gonna kill me or something like that? Why does everything have to be teched up? I don't know. I've hated this trend for a while, and right now, I just think there's way too much money going to that philosophy, and I'm glad we're in Indiana and not California, because I would be pilloried so hard right now. But I do know we have to reiterate the whole trust but verify. It's the culture in our security, in the hacking spaces that we have here. Since any time we've taken things at face value, we've often been proven wrong or harmed. So, you know, we have the really kind of good mentality to start with here. Like, how many would blindly like load in IDS rules or vuln scan results or generic threat intelligence and make a crucial decision on that? You wouldn't. Same thing with just throwing tech at stuff. Think about like who's involved, how it got that way, and what your possible outcomes could be. Sometimes it's a lot simpler when you kind of like take a beat and even take things away from the equation, like factoring out. So one of the things, the last thing I've really kind of learned on this is learning how to ask for something. You know, it's, my spouse is in the audience and I want to call it out, but a lot of times our things are communicating. We need to learn to ask for things, stop doing things to do things. And that starts to foster a really great relationship when you get past that point of just sitting in silence and just being upset. And when you learn to basically say, hey, I need this, I need a moment alone, I need some time to think on things, that's the same way you should be behaving at work. You can carry those tools forward in that way, and it'll make your life so much better. But besides learning to also say no and managing expectations, you gotta learn to do this. We're proud folks, honestly. We wear pride in our sleeve. And we like to toil away, and we like to spin gold out of spit and baling wire and straw. But there are times when it comes down to it, that's when it's more efficient, results in better outcomes, if you actually ask for these resources. I mean, you know, I would basically hate to try to like protect my entire network with just like a pen and a pad of paper. I've documented everything. Yes, it's here. Have you stopped it? No, but it's documented. Now, mind you, you won't always get the resources you ask for, but making others aware that there's a need can start a process, that whole kind of like touching the Venn diagram circles here, your sphere of influences. Most orgs are trying to spin away from these kind of gut-based decision-making paradigm, like, hey, we're down to the wire. What does Bob feel like? I'm picking on, if any of you people are named Bob, I'm sorry. It's just the first name that comes to mind all the time. But you know, Bob over here feels this way, and we've got like 2 minutes to make this decision. All right, we'll check with what Bob has to say, and he'll say something stupid because he's hungry, and we'll go about doing that. You know, it's just one of those things. But now, you know, we're moving towards database decision-making, bring up things to fix, have the data to back it up, but also come with solutions instead of just problems. That's another thing I've learned immensely is like, hey, shit be broken. Well, okay, well, this is what we're gonna do to fix it. That's useful. Come with the data, show things, and that raises your value. For me, it's also kind of a way, I give 3 options. I do a gold, silver, and bronze plan, as you will. The gold is the, oh, hey, if we had all the money in the world, all the resources in the world, all the time in the world, this is what would be a perfect world, and we have rainbows and unicorns and little happy bunnies jumping all over the place. But it's usually too much to ask. You're just basically like gold plating it, essentially. The bronze is like the worst case scenario, like, hey, like I know, you know, I'm gonna be asking you for a couple pennies here. Can you just spare a dime? We can just keep this thing running. It's on life support. I know you don't want to do it, but we got to do it. And a lot of the stuff is like, if you don't at least give it some cash, it'll break and move some, need some love. And silver is kind of, again, that social engineering thing. Slip it in there like, hey, it's not the top level, it's not the bottom level, but it's exactly where you want. It's that kind of Goldilocks spot. The right amount of cash to keep something going, the right amount of people to get things started and fleshed out. And you most likely always end up getting the silver in most cases. I'd say about 10 data points, 10 different jobs for me. So, I'm not going to extrapolate on a larger data set, but that's worked for me. And sometimes you may even get some of the gold options, especially if someone has some extra money at the end of the year and you're like, hey, this person was able to execute on the silver plan. Let's give them a little bit more. I don't know if there's a metal between silver and gold. Copper, something like that. The copper plan, copper top, that would be also the kind of way. So you'll do that, and sometimes it'll make it surprisingly successful. But the key thing with that is getting leadership to make it feel like they've actually contributed. This is a little bit that social engineering aspect of it is like, oh, hey, we helped on this problem. And instead of just making it go away, they can actually see some tangible benefits because you have an execution and a plan. So again, this goes back, don't jump around and wave hands like, hey, we need to do this, everything's on fire, the dumpster is floating down the street with the flames and stuff like that, or this is fine, the little dog or whatever. Again, I told you no memes doesn't mean I don't act them out. But again, you got to play their game too. They're working mind games on you as well. So finally, I think this is my next to last slide here. I'm just check on time, making sure I'm not keeping you too long. Volunteering for effectiveness. We saw all these people here that was in purple shirts. It's great. I love volunteering. I volunteer at a lot of conferences as well. There's a couple of different volunteering types. There's the overzealous. You see that parodied a lot of times in TV shows where you have the person in the back there like, hey, call me, I got all the answers. There's a reluctant one, which is kind of like, all right, I'll go lift this box or move this thing along. And there's a silent, the ones who just kind of toil away. Some will just take on this extra work because it'll appear that they're eager and willing to do what's worthwhile to get ahead and improve the situation. Some of those are the ladder climbers. Some of those are just people who are awesome and good. There's plenty of those out there. The reluctant ones, again, as I said, are kind of resigned to just kind of doing it because they're told to, or voluntold. I love that word. And figured out that you're going to get it out of the way. Just like once it's done, it's out of the way. And then the silent ones, and actually Leslie Carhart had a really good tweet the other day about this, which are the folks who will just jump in, dig in, silently toil away at this thing, and until they've affected that outcome, and just they have enough motivation to keep going. And what she mentioned in her tweet there too was, if you have all your peers and your management that aren't carrying their own weight, they're going to totally be taking advantage of you in time. So there's also times just let it fail. And that's one thing I didn't insert in my talk because this tweet was too new, but I highly recommend going and reading that tweet thread. It's really good. You too can fit in all these different categories. It's also important to kind of recognize when you need to be a little bit of them. Sometimes you need to be the reluctant one. Sometimes you need to be the overzealous one. And other ones, you just gotta do it, like doing dishes. So the key thing is to evaluate what task or problem is at hand and see what you want to do and what's the outcome that you can affect. So that'll throw you in those types of category. Being a spare body sometimes makes things harder, especially if you've got nothing to add. I know I will speak to the conference, folks who volunteer at conferences. I know there's a lot of standing around of what can I do to help? Is there anything I can do to help? Is there anything I can do to help? And that's kind of the spare body syndrome a little bit. But eventually they'll find a way to kind of put you out there. But sometimes it's just get a step back and move away. They don't actually ask for specific skill sets sometimes here, other than maybe some networking folks and some of the folks who have the skills in some of the villages, but it's good to be a general volunteer. Other times it's good to just step away and know when you're not helping. Again, I don't want to call out my spouse, but since they're here, I go down to the garage a lot of times and ask to help, and sometimes I'm making it worse. So I'll step back and get out of the garage. So, it's a good time to understand when you're not wanted, and those are things I also recommend as well. And they're going to come back at me a little bit later and say, see, you need to learn from the same things you say. But this even goes for some of this, our spare time stuff, our hobbies, coding or programming activity, as well as work. You just need to know when you kind of step away. It takes a lot of spoons and brain cycles to be an effective volunteer, so don't be afraid to be a bystander and observer as well. Sometimes your best learning can occur there. So again, be clever, be applied, be helpful. This ties again back to volunteering, but also when you get asked or assigned to a team for some projects. I know I learned to say I'm not what you want back during a major life experience in 2011 when I was thrown on a project that I felt like my skills and role were a terrible match with the team. And this is my government work. It took a few tasks for me to sit there and basically say, hey, man, enough is enough. I'm good. I'm out, and extracted myself from the team and activity. I know that probably didn't look great for management, but it was also like, I'm not making this any better, so it's best to have me out of this. However, conversely, at other times, you need to inject yourself into certain things. If you observe them kind of going awry or even asked to give something kind of a once-over. So this is maybe kind of the corollary to Leslie's tweet from the other day. Like before, if you're doing this, come with solutions unless I'm calling out some of the problems. So if you're going to be asked to kind of volunteer, spend a moment to kind of go and think through things and bring solutions to this. By the time folks typically ask you for help, they'll already be in the problem and want some different perspectives on it. So they'll select you because they want that different set of skills or experiences or fresh eyes or fresh fingers that can get burned on the breadboard when you're soldering, things like that. Don't laud that over them, but understand that they're bringing you in to be a scalpel, to be very direct, careful and meaningful about the kind of help that you're going to go and provide. And basically think about I'm not there to just kind of disturb the apple cart. Don't be a bull in a china shop, again, essentially. Don't be a mess, and just don't do that to just stir things up. That's a case too. Sometimes hey, I want to be part of this thing, and you just end up stirring the pot, and it's just instead of this really beautiful mix of cake batter that has the red swirls and stuff, and it's just this weird god awful Pepto-Bismol pink. Again, if you do this, you may not be asked to help again, and maybe that's your ulterior motive. You don't want to be asked to volunteer again. So it's one way to get out of being bothered, but again, you can lose respect among your peers, and especially if it's a consistent interaction. So you will not be asked to volunteer ever again. So I did a talk similar to this a few DEFCONs ago called Fire All Your Ricks at Mental Health Hacking Village. I don't know if any of you were all there, but I have open sourced this presentation. I actually have to do more of a script for it, but it's worked wonders in people who've ended up using it about identifying burnout in organizations and the stress between folks who are a little too stressed and are brilliant and love to contribute, and folks who are realizing, looking out from the outside in, going, this person's a troublemaker. So I would love to share that with folks at another time, but it's an open source thing to kind of help with discussing burnout, and you get to use action figures. It's awesome. Again, going back to the original part of the title here about hot takes, if you have a hot take, share it so it has some meaning. Probably 98% of you, maybe less now because Twitter's on fire and Facebook sucks. It's just the nature of industry. It's a hallmark, We like to post there and say, hey, we've been there, we've done that, it sucks. We're this sarcastic husks and professional bullshitters at this point. But in that process, hey, we will say, hey, this is a hot take, and we're often in a really good position to look at something. We have policy experts, we have people that are very deep technically on something, we have folks who have years of experience on this stuff. And hey, if you squint hard enough at this thing, maybe you can kind of look at it something differently. And you want to do that to get a little bit more out of it. You want to poke and prod. Maybe you can kind of spur a conversation well beyond where it kind of ended. Much like the subtitle of this talk, the hot takes can't be just something you just throw out without context or an alternative or well-researched critique. I know some of you want to do that. Hey, here's this big pile of poop I'm going to drop on Twitter. Deal with it. Don't. Just it can be funny. It can be biting. Just because for many of us, this career space that we find ourselves in isn't just a job, but it's a passion. It's something that really we were impassioned to kind of come and do. You're here on a Friday. You're here on a work day, for some of you. And we tend to get a little emotional. We get a little irrational at times, and we see some stupid shit. Like some vendor booths at RSA. But we're fine. We're calling that stuff out. If you try to end up taking something down a notch or two, try to be useful or at least somewhat funny with it. I've seen several people go from taking a devil's advocate position mentality just to see how much storm and shit it can kick up, and then they just start posting stupid shit all the time. And their initials are NB, and Naomi is the first name, and you can figure out the rest of it. I had respect for them initially, and then they just started posting crap all the time. And I need to extricate myself from that because it just starts a whole tumbling mess of things. But again, extending your reach, you're kind of like security astral projection. You're if you're not here in this place, this is a way to kind of get your sphere of influence elsewhere. It's more about planting ideas and innovation and letting it grow and expand. Yeah, kind of infect the minds of others. The kind of the head crab, I guess. There's some video games like that. Hey, video games. This is a matter of winning mindshare, getting change through ideas and deeds. Knowing that humans don't scale as well as ideas, this is a carry on to get information to the hands of others. Much here at conferences, I'm trying to infect all these things in your heads here. Such a way of figuring out how to stop a piece of malware. I know with Marcus, that was the whole thing. He's posted about how to stop the C2. That was a great way of using that and spreading those ideas. And he didn't really worry about credit or care. He just wanted to make sure like this was fixed beyond the whole FBI thing later. But there was that other side that was really cool. There's some other mindfulness involved in all this. Kind of take that beat, take that breath, think about this. If there is a good outcome from your work, your ideas, the platitudes and respect will come back to you. There's no way to go out and kind of seek and demand it. Like, hey, I did this cool thing. I did this awesome shit. Give me credit for it. I want to be up on stage right now. I want people tossing flowers at me, free food, hotels, all sorts of other stuff. Thank you, everybody, for the hotel. The other questions as well is like, if people have questions about it, they'll find a way to get back to you. They'll ask the question. That's the other lovely thing about these social networks is if you've done something really cool and there's a couple questions, it'll trickle back. They'll notice you. So don't go out and kind of seek this stuff. And it doesn't actually have to be technical either. You can fix the process. You can address a widely held attitude or misconception, looking at a concept from a different point of view. Everything is open for contribution. So even if you're not like a tech head here, you've got input, you've got value to a lot of this stuff. So find that way that you can do things. And finally, my thing here is you can call it out without being an asshole. You really can. I'm a proverbial asshole in most stories here. Prior to 2010, I was a bit more meek. I was trying to affect some change, but just kind of doing a little thing. I wanted to grow and advance and expand, but it was more about kind of like squeezing through those small holes, like, oh, I can get in here, I can get over here and stuff like that. After 2010 and some changes in my life, I had zero fucking filter. Like I say my mind, and I realize in some cases when I'm existing in a space, it may be the first, last, and only time I'm in that spot. So if I'm ever there, I'm gonna go and take that shot. If there's anything I want to impart here is take your shot when you got it. You'd be surprised the kind of ground you can make and get those ideas across. It's also important to recognize kind of when to pass and when to shoot. And this hey, I'm in Indiana. You guys have a great basketball here. And when to be a team player and when to grandstand a bit. So you got to kind of fit, where you're going to kind of be in this role here. It goes back to language and communication style. Read the room. I don't know how many people are here, but none of you are dozing. I don't hear any snoozing right now, so that's good. But know your audience and know your topic and understand where your goals are on this one. If it's a selfish way to kind of like highlight your ideas and yourself, it's entirely the wrong tactic. If it's to further a goal for the greater good, then you're on the right track. Look for patterns if the load or concept may be too big to handle on your own, and try to find people who can partner with on that. It's okay to actually make this a team effort. Oh, I'm really behind time now. Oh wait, hold on. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to skip some stuff because we're going to run out of time here. All right, sorry about that. I'm having too much fun up here. Anyhow, most of that there's a transcript online of this if you wanted to hear the longer version of it all. But and generally, most of all these cases here are, I'm going to do the abbreviation here. If you're curious, focus that shit, like white hot laser beam. The one thing about being, as I mentioned earlier, about being curious is that you may have a different take on things that other people do. Write it down, document it, share it, get a check on that. If it's a clever hack or kludge that you have, most of our organizations are glued together with these clever hacks and kludges. That's research and development. People ask you, are you in R&D? Yeah, I'm in R&D because I have this little script that I wrote a while ago. I'm developing this to kind of save the organization, document it, make sure that's being able to be passed on to some other folks. If you start off in operations, where most of us started out in, make sure it's documented because you're going to move on, you're going to move up, you're going to make the other person's life a lot easier if you go and do that. And that gives you much more credit. We're talking about credit and stuff, where credit's due. So if you're able to kind of do that. by all means, focus on that because it just make your life and everybody's life easier. And when they join you in the vaulted ranks after you've moved out to operations and moved up the ladder, they'll think of you as the good brother, the good sibling, or whatever. Is that the music that cut me off stage? Damn, that's vicious. I was waiting for the Queen's Another One Bites the Dust. Too soon, I know. I think the last part I wanted to do here, like I said, I'm really sorry for running long. I'm having a little bit too much fun up here. Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot more here. Geez, I had a lot more to talk about. So I'll just touch on the thing that we always touch on here. Most career spaces have a level of imposter syndrome. I'm up here on stage. I feel like I know absolutely nothing. My spouse probably thinks you know absolutely nothing. So I'm like, all right, cool. I feel like I don't fit in a lot of times, because I'm no longer really technical. I'm really overwhelmed at work. But if you got that same thing, get that out of your head. We all have something to contribute here. You all have a new way of looking at a problem or attacking a problem. So it's okay to kind of pivot, switch a new job, pick a new gig, focus on something else, maybe something more entertaining, more fun, something to get you out of bed each morning other than alarm. Jokes again. Some of the best hires I've ever had are non-tech folks. I've hired journalism people. I've hired other folks outside of that. Some of the ones I'd say are most inspiring for me in this space here are people like Keita Masuris, Kwadwo Burji, who's over at DHS right now, Art Mannion, who used to be at CERT. I think he just left. They can scrub it on both sides. They can work kind of the policy side. They can work on the tech side. Having that kind of diverse stuff is a really great bridging thing. But also like Dan Greer from At Stake. He was a microbiologist before he got into security. That was a great skill set to have in this space. And even Jack Daniel, developer of B-Sides. He was in, I think he was also in biology as well. Not a tech person, but we all know him for like B-Sides and technical stuff. So it's really kind of cool. But then again, I'll just try to wrap this up here. I'm sorry for going sideways, but generally, thank you all for your time this morning. I did actually create a little side game for all this. Move this forward here, so there's a thank you. I have improv prompts. So this is something we can maybe finish the talk later after all this, because I didn't want to run over too far. Basically, you have subject A, subject B, an event, a prop, and a situation you have to go and explain. If you want to go and play that sometime this weekend in the game room or whatever, just go to this URL. The prompts are there, and have some fun with it. It's probably more fun to play in the PJs that they asked you to all bring for the Saturday morning cartoons, so that's another opportunity. But thank you so very much for your time.